Have you ever been in a situation where your gut tells you to run, but your brain is too busy trying to find a logical reason to stay? That's how it started for me back in the winter of 24. My name is Robert Russell, and before you ask, yeah, I'm a Texan, born and raised in the humidity of Houston, but I've spent most of my life working as a remote systems land surveyor. Basically, I go where the cell towers don't, mapping out private topography for tech moguls who want to build bunkers or off-grid estates. I was up in the Flathead National Forest, Montana, near the edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness. It was February, and the sky was a permanent bruised shade of grey that felt like it was pressing down on the pines. My wife, Sarah, and our two girls were back home, and honestly, the isolation was usually a perk. I'm a movie buff. Give me a portable projector and a blank cabin wall, and I'm happy. But Montana winter isn't like a movie. It's a living, breathing wait. There's a specific kind of silence up there that doesn't just mean no noise. It means something is listening. I was staying in a decommissioned USFS outpost, a sturdy A-frame with a wood stove and enough solar power to keep my gear running. I didn't have a dog, never have. Sarah's allergic, so it was just me and the wind. The first few days were standard. I'd trek out with my GPS rig, mark the elevations, and get back before the light failed at 4:30 p.m. But on the fourth night, the silence changed. It went from being quiet to being hollow. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, cleaning the lens on my transit level, when I heard it. It wasn't a howl and it wasn't a growl. It was a sound like a heavy wet rug being slapped against a tree trunk. It was rhythmic, moving around the perimeter of the cabin. I froze. My first thought was a grizzly that hadn't quite committed to hibernation, but the gait was wrong. It sounded heavy, but the impact was focused, like 2 feet, not 4. I remember looking at my Ruger Red Hawk 44 on the counter. It's a bear stopper, but suddenly it looked like a toy. I stood up, the floorboards groaning under my boots, and moved toward the north-facing window. The clouds had thinned just enough for a sliver of moonlight to hit the snow. About 30 yards out, near the tree line, I saw a shape. It was hunched over, maybe 7 feet tall, with shoulders that looked as wide as a doorway. It wasn't a bear. The ears were high, pointed, and flickering toward the cabin. Then it stood up straight. I've seen wolves and I've seen shadows, but I've never seen a wolf's head sitting on the top of man's torso, with legs that bent backward at the hock. It didn't look at me yet. It just stood there, sniffing the air, its chest expanding in a way that felt prehistoric. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Why was it here? Why was it watching this cabin? And most importantly, did it know I was looking back? I reached for the light switch, intending to kill the interior lamps so I could see better, but my hand stopped. If I turned the lights off, it would know I was aware of it. I stood paralyzed in the amber glow of the cabin, a goldfish in a bowl, while that thing stood in the dark. Then it turned its head. The eyes caught the light from my window, not a green or yellow glow like a deer, but a dull, burning amber. It didn't snarl, it just stared, and then, with a speed that defied its size, it dropped to all fours and vanished into the timber. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the stove, my Ruger in my lap, thinking about an old copy of Outdoor Life I'd read in a waiting room months back. It had a small sidebar about the Beast of Bray Road and similar sightings in the Northwest, creatures that the hunters called Dogman. I'd laughed it off as bored woodsman looking for a story. I wasn't laughing now. The temperature dropped to 10 below, and I could hear the trees popping in the coals, or at least I hoped it was the trees, because every few minutes I'd hear that rhythmic thump again, just a little closer than before. By dawn, the grey sky hadn't broken, but the physical presence of the sun, somewhere behind those clouds, gave me enough borrowed courage to move. You know that feeling when you are a kid and you are scared of the dark, so you hide under the covers? Well, an A-frame cabin in Montana is just a wooden blanket, and I knew I couldn't stay under it forever. My job wasn't done, and my Texan pride, as stupid as it was in that moment, whispered that I was imagining the scale of that threat. It's just a big wolf, Rob, I told myself, checking the cylinder on the 44. A big, weird, standing wolf. I stepped out onto the porch around 8 a.m. The air was so cold it felt like inhaling needles. I immediately looked toward the tree line, where the shape had been. My heart sank into my gut. There, in the fresh powder, were tracks. They weren't bare paws, and they weren't human. They were massive canine prints, maybe 6 inches long, but the stride was wrong. The distance between the left and right prints was too narrow for a four-legged animal. It had walked to the edge of the clearing on two legs, paced back and forth, and then sat. I could see the depression in the snow where a heavy tail or haunches had rested. I spent the morning trying to work near the cabin, keeping my back to the wall as much as possible. I was setting up a secondary base station for the GPS when I realized the woods had gone completely silent again. No chickadees, no squirrels, not even the wind in the needles. That's the Oz effect. That's what those magazines call it. It's like the forest holds its breath because something higher on the food chain just walked into the room. I dropped my surveying rod and reached for the holster on my chest. I didn't see it at first. I saw the movement of the shadows. About 50 yards out, between two massive Douglas firs, a patch of darkness shifted. It was stalking me. It wasn't rushing, it was drifting from trunk to trunk with a terrifying liquid grace. I caught a glimpse of a grey-black ear, then a long, narrow snout that looked more like a German shepherd's than a timber wolf's. It was staying in my peripheral vision, testing me. I started backing up toward the porch stairs. My eyes locked onto the spot where I'd seen the last movement. "I see you," I yelled, my voice cracking in the thin air. "I'm armed." It didn't care. A low, vibrating hum started to echo through the trees. It wasn't a growl, it was a frequency I felt in my teeth. Then, a second sound joined it from the opposite side of the clearing. A sharp, clicking noise, like stones being struck together. My stomach did a slow roll. There wasn't just one. I scrambled up the porch steps, fumbling with the heavy iron latch of the door. Just as I pulled it open, something slammed into the side of the cabin, hard enough to rattle the dishes on the shelves inside. I spun around, the Ruger leveled at the corner of the building. A hand, no, a paw with elongated black nailed fingers gripped the edge of the cedar siding. It was huge, covered in coarse, wire-like fur. I didn't wait. I fired a shot into the air, the roar of the 44 deafening in the enclosed porch area. The hand vanished. I heard a series of heavy, frantic thuds as whatever it was retreated into the brush. I bolted inside and slammed the door, throwing every bolt we had. I was breathing so hard I thought I'd pass out. I leaned against the door, the cold from the wood seeping into my back. That's when I heard the scratching. Not on the door, on the roof. Something was pacing the shingles directly above my head, its claws scraping against the wood like knives on a chalkboard. It knew I was trapped, and it seemed to be enjoying the fact that I knew it too. I looked at the satellite phone on the charger. No signal. The cloud cover was too thick, or maybe the trees were just too tall. I was 40 miles from the nearest paved road, with at least two of those things circling my blanket. I thought about Sarah and the girls. I thought about how I'd never told them how much I actually hated these remote jobs. And then, the scratching on the roof stopped, replaced by a heavy, wet sniffing right at the chimney vent. There is a specific kind of dread that settles in when you realize your fortress is actually a cage. That scratching on the roof wasn't just random. It was a probe, a way for them to test the structural integrity of my only hiding spot. I stood in the center of the room, looking up at the ceiling joists, watching the dust shake loose every time a heavy weight shifted above me. I had to do something or I was going to be dinner in a cedar box. I remembered the flares in my emergency kit, industrial grade phosphorus sticks, meant for signaling aircraft. I grabbed the kit and my bear spray, shoving the extra 44 rounds into my pocket with trembling fingers. Suddenly, a window in the loft shattered. It wasn't a rock or a branch. A massive dark head had shoved its way through the glass. The smell hit me instantly. It was the scent of wet dog mixed with rotting meat and something metallic, like old pennies. I saw the snout, long and wrinkled in a snarl, revealing teeth that were white, sharp, and far too numerous. I didn't think. I just aimed the Ruger and squeezed the trigger. The blast in that small space was like a bomb going off, blowing out my eardrums. The creature let out a sound I'll never forget, a high-pitched, human-like scream of rage that transitioned into a guttural bark. It tumbled backward off the roof, and I heard it hit the snow with a dull whomp. But the victory was short-lived. From the shadows of the lower floor, the second one, the stoker from the trees, slammed its body against the front door. The heavy timber groaned, the hinges screaming under pressure. "Not today, you son of a," I muttered, grabbing a heavy oak dresser and shoving it against the door. I was acting on pure adrenaline now, that survival instinct that overrides the part of your brain that wants to curl up and cry. I knew I couldn't stay. The one I'd shot was wounded, and in the wild a wounded predator is either a coward or a nightmare, and these things didn't seem like cowards. They were working together, flanking me, showing a level of tactical intelligence that made my skin crawl. I looked at the cinema projector, still sitting on the side table. It sounds crazy, but a thought struck me. These things were used to the dark, to the grey, to the shadows. I grabbed the projector, turned it on and set it to the highest lumen output, projecting a chaotic flickering scene from an old action movie I had queued up. Strobe-like flashes of white and blue light filled the cabin and spilled out the broken loft window. If I couldn't outfight them, I'd overstimulate them. I heard a confused whimper from outside. The flickering light was throwing distorted, dancing shadows across the snow, making it impossible for them to see what was a real movement and what was just a projection. I took the moment of hesitation to grab my snowshoe gear and my heavy pack. I had a snowmobile parked under a lean-to about 50 yards away. 50 yards might as well have been 50 miles with those things out there, but it was my only shot. I cracked the back door, the one leading toward the lean-to, and waited for a flash of white light from the projector to hit the clearing. I sprinted. My boots sank deep despite the snowshoes, and every muscle in my legs screamed. I could hear them behind me, the heavy, rhythmic thump-thump of the one on two legs and the frantic scrambling of the other. I didn't look back. I reached the lean-to, ripped the trap off the Yamaha, and fumbled for the pull start. Cough, sputter, nothing. I looked up and saw it, the larger Dogman, standing on the roof on the lean-to, looking down at me with those burning amber eyes. It opened its mouth and for a second I thought it was going to speak. Instead, it let out a low mocking huff of air that smelled of death. The beast looked down at me from the rafters, its ears flattened against a skull that looked far too large for any natural wolf. It was the king of this mountain, and I was just meat in a nylon jacket. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly lost my grip on the pull cord, but I remembered the phosphorus flare in my pocket. I didn't reach for the gun, I reached for the light. I struck the flare against the side of the snowmobile, and a violent, blinding crimson spark hissed into existence, throwing a hellish red glow over the creature's matted fur. The Dogman recoiled, its sensitive pupils shrinking as it shielded its face with a clawed hand. I didn't waste the second it gave me. I yanked the cord with everything I had left, and the Yamaha's engine roared to life, a beautiful, mechanical scream that cut through the ancient silence. I pinned the throttle, the threads digging into the packed snow and sending a rooster tail of white powder into the beast's face. I heard a roar of frustration behind me, a sound that wasn't quite an animal but certainly wasn't a man. I went through the trees like a madman, the flare still clutched in my left hand, trailing sparks like a dying comet. I could see them in the periphery, dark shapes keeping pace through the thick timber, moving with a terrifying bipedal lope that ate up the distance. They weren't giving up, they were hurting me. I knew the trail curved sharply toward the frozen creek bed, and if I wiped out there, I was done. I felt a heavy impact against the back of the snowmobile, nearly throwing me from the seat. One of them had swiped at me, its claws leaving deep grooves in the plastic cowling. "Come on, baby, hold together," I screamed, leaning hard into the turn. I reached the bridge, a narrow wooden span over the ice, and I saw the second one, the one I'd shot, waiting on the other side. It was limping, its shoulder soaked in dark blood, but its eyes were fixed on my throat. I didn't slow down, I aimed the snowmobile straight for it, and at the last possible second, I tossed the burning phosphorus flare directly at its chest. The creature shrieked and dove into the deep snow to avoid the chemical fire, and I shot past it like a bullet. I didn't stop for 40 miles. I didn't stop until I saw the flickering neon sign of a gas station on the outskirts of Kalispell. I sat on that snowmobile in the parking lot, the engine ticking as it cooled, and I just cried. People looked at me like I was crazy. A grown man, covered in sweat and soot, shaking in the Montana cold. I didn't care. I called Sarah right then and there, and when I heard her voice, I knew I was never going back to the high timber. I quit the job the next day. I told the firm a grizzly had stalked the cabin and I didn't feel safe, which was technically a lie, but how do you put werewolf thing on a resignation letter? Sometimes, late at night, back in Texas, I'll be watching a movie, something quiet, and I'll hear a rhythmic thump on the side of the house. My rational brain tells me it's just the wind or a neighbor's dog. But then I remember the smell, the wet fur, and the pennies, and I check the locks on the door. Because I know they don't just hunt for food, they hunt for the sport of it, and I'm the one that got away. At least, for now.